Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was just going to say, since our Director General, Mr. Arish Sharma, gave you an overview of the UID, I'm going to talk about the technology behind the UID. Jay already spoke about enterprise management systems. And Mr. S.K. Sinha from NIC has a lot of experience in biometrics and smart cards. So he's going to talk about a number of projects that NIC has done in biometrics and smart cards. And finally, Ashank Desai from Mastech. They are, in fact, one of the empaneled agencies for building applications. So he's going to talk about how you can build UID applications, the challenges in building UID applications. So with that, let me get started on the technology of Aadhaar itself. So what you see out there, fairly complicated slide, on the left you see enrollments happening. That is, at the bottom there are laptops and all these devices doing enrollments in villages and towns, and then this gets collected by the registrar, which is in the middle, which is a state government or a bank or a LIC or what have you, and then they send those packets over to our CIDR, which is the Central ID Repository, a large data center with lots of machines and so on, which is in yellow on the top left. And there we process and issue Aadhaars. And what does this processing mean? It means, let's say Ashank stands in line somewhere in, I guess, Mumbai and enrolls himself. In fact, we are, enrolling in Mumbai. I have to take his fingerprints, his iris, his photograph, and actually I have to compare him with the entire database of people I have in the back end. Okay, so imagine the Cartesian product of matches that I have to do to ensure that he's truly unique. So that I'm sure that he doesn't run to Delhi during the eWORLD conference and get another UID. Because he comes from, it doesn't matter where you come from, because we are matching against the entire country, each one of your biometrics, right? So that's what's happening on the left side, very compute intensive, okay? That's the characteristic of that system. When you move to the right, authentication, that's when he's already got his Aadhaar. Now he's going to the bank, or he's going to, get maybe in a PDS system, although I doubt he's going to the PDS shop, but let's say he goes to one of the service providers, he turns in his Aadhaar number and he puts his fingerprint. That's when authentication comes into picture. There, the characteristic of the system is quick response time. As someone said, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever, very quickly, and using our infrastructure, which means mobile networks and wherever available, broadband and so on, right? So it should work from the boonies, from little villages, across mobile networks, come back and give you the correct answer through online authentication. And finally, there's the micro ATM itself. We have designed a device called the micro ATM. I think our DG spoke about it. I'll skip that. That's to ensure that people in villages, far-flung villages, can also have access to ATM-like facilities. Okay, moving forward, the UID works with a whole bunch of partners. So at the back end, the CIDR itself is a box out there with the yellow boxes and so on. So we have biometric systems. We have 3 systems. The first time in the world where 3 biometric providers are running our backend as opposed to just 1. It's a lot easier when you say there's only 1 backend biometric provider and 1 device manufacturer. You can make it work. But when you have multiple of them at the back end and many, many devices in the front end, it becomes a whole lot harder. So when you move down to the left, we have the registrars, so state governments and so on. There's the logistic provider, India Post, who delivers our letters to the citizen, the Aadhaar letters. In the front end, we have enrollment devices. There are device manufacturers who want to be UID compliant. We have a compliance spec. We have a certification agency, which is STQC. So they're making these devices compliant so that they can interoperate in our ecosystem. After that, after enrollment, once people have Aadhaars, you have authentication, so there are authentication devices. There are applications people will write on top of authentication devices, whether it's financial inclusion, for PDS, for selling stamps in India Post, or what have you. So there is a whole ecosystem of partners, and how do we make all this work? We make this work through standards. We have a set of enrollment standards, we have a set of authentication standards, and a whole bunch of processes that hold all this together. The reason why we're getting 600,000 or whatever, 500, 600,000 enrollments today is because there's this whole ecosystem that's working and pumping in enrollments. So how does that work? So basically, at the lower left, enrollment devices, we have come up with the Aadhaar Biometric Capture Device API. That means if you plug in a device to the Aadhaar client software, it should automatically detect it. There's a virtual device manager. We have come up with a spec, right? So that the poor enrolling agency doesn't have to figure out how to make all this work. It should be plug and play. So the next thing is the Aadhaar ABIS API, which is at the back end. We have 3 ABIS providers, biometric service providers. If for whatever reason it doesn't work out with one of them, you should be able to take that out, put in another system out there. How is that possible? Through APIs, application programmatic interfaces. They're completely standardized. So all 3 ABIS vendors respond to our calls exactly in the same way, right? In the front end, Aadhaar Biometric SDK, since we have a client software that does biometric capture, we do segmentation, quality check, and all of that on the client. So that if I'm the operator, I didn't get his enrollment right, the software immediately tells me quality is not good enough. Don't even waste your time sending the packet upstream, do the enrollment again. So a lot of that is inbuilt into the Aadhaar client. So who supplies us the biometric SDKs? It's these 3 companies, but it's standardized, right? The SDKs are also standardized. The APIs are standardized. By the way, it works on Linux, it works on Windows, and so on. Lastly, the Aadhaar authentication device specs. Once enrollments are done, you want to use it in authentications, whether it's in bank, PDS, NRE, GA, where have you. At that point, you want those authentication devices to be compliant with UID specs. You want the way in which they send the packet to us to be standardized. It's ISO template that needs to be sent to us, or an ISO image. So all those standards are in the Aadhaar auth specs. And finally, the Aadhaar auth API at the back end, where our ABIS players come into the picture, is also standardized. So that's sort of how we go about it, and all these standards are downloadable. If you're one of these players who are working in, who can supply to the UID ecosystem, please go down to our website, take a look. We have all those published there. I was going to talk a little bit about the architecture principles. How did we choose our systems? How did we choose our technology? Firstly, we have stuck to open standards to ensure interoperability so that there is no vendor lock-in. Even if there are some parts of the system where we don't have open source components, we have ensured that they are based on standards so we can remove that component, put another without rocking the boat, right? Use of open source technologies wherever prudent and possible. And in fact, this has worked out really well. So this is not a system where you see, proprietary system right from database to whatever, web and so on and so forth. It is completely open source based systems, right from MySQL to Hadoop to MapReduce to RabbitMQ, to all of them are completely open source systems that are scaling. Okay, and this is one of the largest projects of its kind, so its scalability has to be built into the DNA of the system. Lastly, multi-platform support. So since it's an ecosystem play, different people want to use different systems, whether it's Linux or Microsoft, and so we support both of those. That means our device manufacturers who are compliant with UID have to provide VDMs in both Linux and Microsoft, right? So if let's say you're the user, you get to choose which operating system you want. So we've tried to keep the same sort of idea across the board. What kind of an architecture do we use? I mean, people talked about this is an enormous system, this is the largest in the world, and so on and so forth. What is it that, what are the architectural patterns at the back end? We use a SEDA, a staged event-driven architecture, basically which allows for smart failure handling. See, when you're building a car, you don't put 100 people to crowd around and build the car. Instead, there are components. One guy's building headlights, one guy's building whatever, wheels, another person's looking at engine and so on, and somebody puts it all together. So it's a pipeline, it's an assembly line. Aadhaar processing is exactly like that. The enrollment processing is an assembly line. We check the demographics first, then we check the operator's biometrics to see if we recognize the operator, then we get into the resident biometric deduplication itself, and so on. I'm sort of oversimplifying at this point. We use highly asynchronous, high-speed messaging layer. Okay, it's based on message queues. It's not, everything doesn't go to a database because it'll slow things down. So there is a prudent use of database and distributed file systems and so on, and pretty much all the data is sharded across databases and DFS over a distributed platform because we have to scale horizontally. We need to be able to, as and when more and more people start getting Aadhaars, we need to be able to scale horizontally as well as vertically, right? So these are some of the architectural choices that we've made to ensure that scalability is